It is called the Democracy Playbook. It is a plan to strengthen democracy, protect voting rights, and support election administration across America. Colorado is highly regarded in the playbook. Greetings again. I'm Adam Morgan. Led by the Democracy Working Group of the organization the New Deal Forum, the newly updated version of the Democracy Playbook sets its focus on elections and election integrity. Following the misinformation-driven insurrection of January 6th at the Capitol, coupled with the continuing assaults on America's electoral system by losing candidates, the New Deal Forum felt it was important to share the best practices of Americans' elections to strengthen and better protect our democracy. We highlight the Democracy Playbook and a few of its 40 recommendations with New Deal Forum CEO, Ms. Debbie Cox Bultan.
Yes, this week we released what we're calling our Democracy Playbook, and what it is a list or a menu, if you will, of more than 40 ideas of how to strengthen democracy around the country, aimed at the state and local levels, which is what we do. The New Deal is a national network of state and local elected officials who are doing great things across the country, and the New Deal Forum, which released the playbook, is our sister organization that works on policy ideas. And the idea was that we have this amazing network of folks who are really the ones who are the election administrators. As you well know, state and local folks are the ones who are executing and administering our elections. And so in the wake of all that's happened in 2020 and beyond, in terms of what really can be seen as an attack on our democracy, we thought that this was important to give some really concrete examples of how people can strengthen their democracy at the state and local levels.
Is it almost fruitless in some cases to try to convince that hardcore bunch that all the elections we have are very good, they're safe, they're solid, and those who want to just walk around saying, I stole it, you just got to leave them there and let them, bask in their own disinformation?
And I would say this: I think that there are, a handful or whatever that percentage of people, or some percentage of people who are never going to believe that elections are secure. But I do think that there's a lot more we can do to assure people who really just have legitimate questions about how elections work, and make them feel more secure about it. So I was really struck. This playbook was the result of more than a year of work from our Democracy Working Group, which was chaired by Secretary of State's Jocelyn Benson in Michigan, and Adrian Fontes in Arizona, and a county commissioner in Pennsylvania, and a state legislator in Nevada, all of whom have done great work. And we talked to experts and other elected officials all over the country from nearly a year before releasing this playbook. And one of the things that I was so struck by was the consistent message we heard from people about transparency and all the things that people could be doing to make the process more transparent for people. So examples being, actually most states have requirements that you test voting machines, and you can do that in a public way. We have the Secretary of State of Minnesota, who's a New Deal leader, on talking about that, and he said, I used to do this before all the election hubbub, and nobody would come to these things. Now I get press to come, when we test the machines. It's a very perfunctory thing. We've been doing it forever. But, just to give some kind of confidence or, things like that, or things like tracking one's ballot. I live in California. We have a really great system where, when I drop off my ballot in a drop box or wherever I do, I get a note or a text that they've received my ballot. I get another text when my ballot's been counted. It just is, again, it's that transparency in the process. So to answer your question, I'm sure there are people who are never, no matter what happens, are never going to, be on board that our, elections are safe or secure or whatever. But that's just not the facts. And we have the securest elections in the world, and I think the more people can do to be transparent about them, the more we will have the majority of people understanding that that's true.
But is that also, the responsibility of the citizen like me, to when elections come around, I need to pay more attention as to how it's run, how my vote gets through, because a lot of people would say, well, elections, it's who wants to talk about that? And then they come back later saying, oh, well, I didn't know. Well, it was always there. So, we don't have too much civic responsibility requirements in America, but that should be one of them.
You're, preaching to the choir on that one. I completely agree, and I feel like with rights come responsibilities, and I agree, absolutely agree. It does not seem like too much to ask that, in a representative democracy, everyone take their responsibility to vote seriously, and then, and to your point, there is a way that you can, express your displeasure with what's happening or reaffirm that you like what's happening with your vote, right? Who you put in office to represent you. So I couldn't agree more, and I absolutely think that people have a responsibility to take that, to take their job of voting seriously. I remember that was instilled in me in a really young age. I remember, being a kid out of college and, trying to figure out how to get my ballot back from D.C. when I lived there back to California. But that's how seriously I took it, because I knew that was something I needed to do. But I will say that even though I really totally agree with you, I do think, again, there are things that elected officials and election administrators can also do to make the process easier for people. I mean, one thing that we're seeing a really concerning trend in some states to make voting, as you well know, harder, and I think that's really unfortunate. We just came off this kind of experiment during COVID, where we were trying to figure out how to run these elections during COVID, and we found out that actually, lo and behold, if you make it easier for people to vote, whether it's expanding your absentee voting or instituting no excuse voting, basically meaning that you could be a vote by mail person for any reason all the time, putting more drop boxes out, people will vote. I mean, when you have limited hours in very limited places on where you can vote, you make it really hard for people who are working long hours to vote. That's not helpful. So I think, Colorado, as you well know, is really a beacon of people who do these things right. And, you guys had a great uptick in your voting, according to the League of Conservation Voters, the League of Women Voters in Colorado, yes. Almost 10% or something higher when people were able to do that absentee vote by mail. So I think that's, we should learn from that.
In my African American community, I always remind them when they say, "Oh, they're taking away special voting days, they're taking away souls to the polls." I remind them about Fannie Lou Hamer, and they go, "Fannie Lou Hamer said, yeah, back in their day, they didn't have any of that. They just showed up at the polls, whatever it was, and voted." We got to have the same resiliency.
That's right. I mean, we do. But I mean, we all watch some of those lines that were happening, particularly in communities of color. And on one hand, just such immense inspiration for people who, we're going to stay in those lines no matter what and vote. But, that's not a reason. I mean, it is government's job to make sure that people can vote, and people, and to recognize, meet people where they are. We have some interesting stuff in our playbook about, some states that have the mobile voting buses, right, that drive around to different communities where there's, fewer polling places. I mean, this is not really hard to do, and I think that, to kind of our earlier conversation, a functioning democracy depends on people being able to vote, feeling that sense of agency, and we have to make it easier for people to participate.
One of the areas in the playbook, it said that we've got to give more support, or give a consistent support, to election officials and poll workers, because no matter what side of the fence they're on, these are the people that are showing up and doing their job and making sure the system operates.
Yes. Absolutely, 100%, and I think that's probably one of the most disturbing things that happened, as part of 2020 and beyond, has been this, completely baseless and unacceptable introduction of violence against poll workers into this system. I mean, these are just people doing their civic duty to make sure. And it takes so much, right? It takes so much manpower to administer these elections. So, I mentioned Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson a minute ago. She's as one of our co-chairs of this. One of her first things after being reelected has been to introduce and push for stiffer penalties against people who intimidate or threaten poll workers, and I just applaud her for that. I mean, this is something that we have to have people who will administer these elections. And to your point, this is not a partisan issue at all, and we have to support them, and we have to absolutely not accept any form of violence or intimidation or threatening of the people who are doing this for us.
We also have to counter the acts of voter intimidation to try to keep people away by looking at them through binoculars and taking pictures and that kind of stuff, too. I think that's one of the areas the playbook says something has to be done about that.
Yeah, I think it's that, it's the transparency, and then there's protection. It's protection of these poll workers. It's also, recruitment of poll workers too, right? This is, I worry about this actually because of so much attention on those high-profile, really just terrible, tragic incidences with poll workers. We need people to come out and do this, and so, I think we've also got to think about how we're going to recruit poll workers, and we do have in the playbook as part of our section on kind of civic engagement and civic education. In some states have done a good job of encouraging young people to come out and be poll workers, which I think the earlier we get to people, the earlier they see the process, they're part of the process, the more invested they feel in it. I think that's important too.
I know you just said young people becoming involved. Are we seeing more young people becoming interested? I was thinking the way young men still have to file a draft card for service along the way. That may be a community service requirement that young people file a card to be poll workers to make elections work.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting idea, and I will tell you that I'm a huge proponent of national service, have been for a long time, and whether it's around the polls in elections specifically or some other way to give back to your community, I just think it's so important. I feel like we've, as we're battling this kind of bigger picture about the health of our nation and the civility of our discourse and other things, I think, having those shared experiences of engaging, in a community, helping people in their community is so important. So whether that's, community service, my kids do it through their high school, as a graduation requirement, but, there's other ways to do this where you just have these opportunities to engage, whether it's, working in a soup kitchen or teaching or poll working, whatever it is. I think that's just a really important part of kind of, to your point about, being part of a community. We're not all individuals. We live here together, and and we need those shared experiences. There's in the playbook specifically. There's a good example of a New Hampshire law where a New Deal leader, Matt Wilhelm, who had promoted worked to expand the number of opportunities there were for the national service, the Corporation for National Service being a federal program in New Hampshire. And I think that's one thing states can do is to make more of those opportunities available.
The playbook also speaks of equity in elections. Develop that for me when we're talking about equity.
Yeah, well, I think that goes back, there's a lot of ways to think about, look at an equity lens. But I mean, at its core, I think we're talking about meeting people where they are and understanding challenges that different communities have, and so whether that is, as we were talking about earlier, understanding the hours that polls need to be open to accommodate people who work, different shifts, whether that's making sure that there's, polling places, or that's why absentee voting is so great, where people, or people don't have transportation and can't drive themselves, 3 miles to a polling place. I think we have to acknowledge all of that. And then there's also, equity when it comes to generational, too. And I think that's why it's so important we're talking about young people and how to engage them in the process early, because different people have different challenges. The goal is, I think, everyone, again, regardless of party, should believe that the more people voting in a secure and transparent way, is the goal. That's what a functioning democracy requires. So I think that we have to do more to make sure that everybody, regardless of where they live and what their circumstances are, have those opportunities.
The playbook also mentioned one of the real threats to elections, countering the misinformation that's going on. It's
so true. It's so true, and it's such a tricky, hard issue to tackle for sure. This is not in the playbook, but I will just note that I mentioned I have teenagers, and I saw somewhere like this online poll or online quiz or whatever you call it, where it asked people to go through and determine if a statement was fact or opinion, and some abysmal amount of people could not tell the difference.
On this edition, the topic is the Democracy Playbook. It's a plan to strengthen democracy, protect voting rights, and support election administration across the nation. Colorado's election system is referenced in the playbook. We are conversing with Ms. Debbie Cox Bultan, CEO of the New Deal Forum, which produced the Democracy Playbook. Our conversation with her continues on our next edition. I'm Adam Morgan. Do keep in touch. Get your shots for COVID and flu to protect yourself. And we do appreciate you for sharing a few moments of your weekend with us. Just ahead of President's Day, the organization, the New Deal Forum, that works with over 200 officials across the country, released their plan, the Democracy Playbook. It is a blueprint that recommends the work to be undertaken by officials to strengthen our democracy ahead of the 2024 elections. It is their response to the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Greetings again. I'm Adam Morgan. The Democracy Playbook offers over 40 actionable recommendations that state and local leaders can institute to better support election management, to protect voting rights, and strengthen our democracy. The playbook offers policies and best practices to counter voter suppression tactics, fortify election integrity, to keeping voters safe on Election Day. On this edition, we continue turning through the pages of the Democracy Playbook with the leader CEO of the New Deal Forum, Ms. Debbie Cox Bultan. The playbook also mentioned one of the real threats to elections, countering the misinformation that's going on.
It's so true. It's so true, and it's such a tricky, hard issue to tackle for sure. This is not in the playbook, but I will just note that I mentioned I have teenagers, and I saw somewhere like this online poll or online quiz or whatever you call it, where it asked people to go through and determine if a statement was fact or opinion, and some abysmal amount of people could not tell the difference. And so I had my teenagers do it just I had this panic attack, and and they did it, and they did well, actually, thank God. But I do think it's really important. I mean, we're just bombarded with information. We're listening to to people who as a society, who reinforce our, the beliefs we have, not getting other points of view, and again, and even more, detrimental than that, not even agreeing on what are actually facts. So I think it's something we actually absolutely have to address. And so that you mentioned the playbook. The playbook does have, which I think it's the first of its kind in the country, a Delaware piece of legislation that Sarah McBride, a New Deal leader, passed, which requires high school curriculum to include a conversation about online information, learning how to tell what is fact, and I don't know all the specifics, but determining what to do is fact or opinion, just giving people the tools they need to navigate this really pretty new kind of Wild Westy environment on what's real and what's not, and it is absolutely critical. I mean, look, the whole lead up to January 6th, was such a tragic and horrific, path on what can happen when all this disinformation is spread. Now we're peeling back the layers, and I was actually, watching the January 6th commission meeting, one of the hearings. Actually, I was in D.C. watching one of the hearings when really. Such a powerful testimony was given from somebody from Ohio about why they came to the Capitol that day, and and basically he was like, "Look, I was told this thing, I believed it. I've now since learned that a lot of what I was told was not true, and if I have one message for people, it's to take the blinders off and to make sure you understand where you're getting your information from." So we got really lucky that the breach held, that we were able to weather the 2020 election crisis and January 6th, but and a lot of heroic people stood up and did that. But we've got long-term challenges we have to solve, and misinformation is absolutely critical.
It isn't the system that's the problem. It's the issues you want to run on.
Yeah.
And when you lose, you can't blame the system.
Yeah. Well, can I say this too? I mean, I think that's super interesting you said that. And I feel like, one, thing that gave me a lot of hope and was very heartening to me was the outcomes of the midterm elections, in the sense of, people who were running as election deniers, people who were running, against kind of our system of democracy, by and large lost. And I thought that was such a huge testament to the American people to kind of see that and understand that democracy is important, and that the people who are going to undermine it and to battle against it, we're not going to put into elected office. And that's particularly, it's true at any level of office, but some of the ones that made me the most nervous were people who were running for secretaries of states or for local election, administrators, whose whole job is to, administer these fairly and in a nonpartisan, way, and to have them kind of running against the system was incredibly scary to me.
America, we vote one ballot. That's it. There's not a special ballot for every single race, just one. And the election system is there to just tabulate the ballots. And whoever wins, wins. Whoever loses, loses. So you can always have confidence in that.
That's right. Well, exactly. And, I think that's exactly right. And I just feel like, there's just, I feel like just people have to understand, a lot about, people need to learn more about the system. Let me say that. I feel like one of the other pieces of misinformation that was really kind of, was calculated and was so hurtful was because of the way we particularly were voting in 2020 because of the pandemic, and we were doing so much more vote by mail and the drop boxes and other things, so people didn't have to be in person together during the middle of COVID. Was what was going to happen and how that was going to play out. And so one thing is, the more and more people who use that system, which again I think is a fantastic system because it just allows more people to vote from, and make it easier. But the some of the rules in different states about when those ballots could be counted, how long it would take to report the results, and then who voted that way versus who didn't. That was very complicated, and so people were hearing that you're going to be up here, but then when the absentee votes start coming in, start getting counted, you're going to lose, and that's because new votes are being found or whatever the language they were using was. And that was just it was absolutely predictable, and it made a lot of sense if you understood why, that some of those absentee votes couldn't be counted by law, even till after the end of election day, right? But that requires, to your earlier point, kind of a knowledge of the system and an awareness that a lot of just people who vote and don't pay attention, and nor should they have to, don't understand. And so it's, again, up to us, I think, as people who care about this. And yes, we should all get educated, and we should do more educating.
I think the Playbook also suggested that Election Day be made a holiday. And you may have some companies say, well, we don't want to pay them for a holiday. Well, you can make it on a Saturday. There you go. It's still a holiday.
Right. I think there's lots of ways that can happen, and I do. I like the idea, and there are a number of cities and other jurisdictions who have already done that for giving their city employees the day off to vote. I think so. And at a minimum, I liked making the holiday, but at a minimum, I think we have a section at the end that's not geared only toward elected officials or election administration, but also toward just normal people, business owners, and others. And if we're not going to make it a holiday in the interim, give your people time off to vote during the day, right? Don't penalize them for that. I think that's something that every civic-minded person, business owner can do. Or give them the day off to be a poll worker, as we were talking about earlier. Just to support your employees, doing their civic duty.
Civic duty. You can talk about businesses. How can businesses become more involved in civic engagement outside of maybe supporting their own individual candidates for their own self-interest? How can they become more engaged to help their employees?
Yeah, well, just as I just said, I think one of the main things folks can do if they're business owners is to, allow their employees the time off that they need to vote or to work in as a poll worker or whatever it is. And I think and a lot of companies do this well, but is to offer nonpartisan information to their employees about where and how to vote in their states. Every state's different, so it's have those kind of resources available for your employees. Help them, help them help democracy.
Help them help democracy.
By giving them that information and that support in their participation in it.
I always run into people saying, "Well, this is really a big issue. I don't think me as an individual can do very much to help or to affect," and some of them get frustrated because they can't think of anything. What would you recommend to listeners that they could do as individuals? Some of the action steps for civic engagement, that the one or two things that they can do to help make democracy work and elections work.
Yeah. Well, the very first and foremost thing, of course, is they can vote, right? And they can tell their friends and neighbors to vote, and they can drive their neighbor who can't get to the polls, and they can, just make all of, just engage in that way. I think there's a lot of things folks can do, but I think another thing is to combat that disinformation. I mean, these are conversations we're having around kitchen tables now or at the workplace or whatever. And so when you hear something that, this election was stolen because of blah blah blah, I think it's important to take that on and to say, no, that's not right. Here's the information. This is how we do it. If you do this, I get this. I show you my text where it shows I voted and that it shows that they received my ballot. You can do that too. I just think it's important to engage in these conversations. Supporting, some of these changes and legislation and other things from an advocacy perspective, whether it's making absentee ballots permanent, whether it's having more drop boxes in your community, whether it's trying to find more opportunities for national service. Those are all things that people can support and let their elected officials know that's something they support.
Well, the bottom line on it is that one place we don't need any division at all is in elections, because the more that people can vote, no matter which side you're on, the more opportunity you have to win.
That's right. Well, that's right, and that's why it's kind of. I'll open up a whole other can of worms if I start comparing it to the masks. But I do feel so forget that. But I do feel like I absolutely agree with your point that this is elections should not be partisan, right? And I also the reason I was going to compare it is because I'm really honestly and really utterly confused by the fact that people think that making it easier to vote might benefit one party or another, right? I mean, really, the truth is that kind of probably depends on where you live, whether you live in a more blue or a more red state or whatever it is. But these tools that we're giving people that we're encouraging and recommending, these tools in terms of making it easier to vote, being able to get to your ballot places at a time that works for you, whether protecting poll workers. None of those should be partisan issues. None of them. I mean, this is, to your point, this is the fundamental way we have in a democracy to make our voice heard and to tell people who we want representing us, and to pretend, to act like that's one party or another's domain just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, the NewDEAL forum.
Yes.
What else are you working on besides the playbook? What else does the forum do?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question, and I will take my last opportunity to also. I should have at least I talked earlier about how much we appreciate Colorado's efforts in really being a beacon for good democracy, and I really want to commend your governor, Jared Polis, who I think has just done an excellent job on this. But to your question, thank you, NewDEAL Forum. Yeah, we are really about trying to find good best practices all over the country in a variety of issue areas where we have these elected officials who are doing great work. So we have work going on right now on education, on climate, on broadband. There's really an opportunity right now. The federal government has made a lot of investments at the state and local level since COVID, and we're working with our elected officials around the country to make sure that those monies are being, they're really having impact in which they are, and then highlighting those success stories, housing, child care, a number of issues like that. But there's so much exciting. We hear all about the bad stuff. There's really a lot of exciting stuff happening and government working really well at the state and local level to really solve people's problems. And part of what we're doing at the forum is to show those where government is doing a great job, and to export those ideas around the country.
Our sincere appreciation to Ms. Debbie Cox Bultan, CEO of the NewDEAL Forum, authors of the Democracy Playbook, for being our guest again for this edition. You can check out the playbook online at New Deal Leaders. That's New Deal Leaders, 2 L's, newdealleaders.org/democracy-playbook. I'm Adam Morgan. Do keep in touch. Stay in your game. Grab a flu or COVID shot if you need them. And many thanks to you as well for sharing a few of your weekend moments with us.